Hi guys. How's it going, Gav? How's it going, Rex?
Hi,
Good morning, Ash.
Good to see you.
No, you too. Yeah, looking forward to our chat today. I'm going to start off by introducing both of you. So today we have two people that we'll be interviewing on the subject of critical thinking. We're joined by Rex Samuelson and Gavin Rich. I thought I'd start us off by just discussing or talking a little bit about our two speakers. So Rex is a chartered accountant. You know, when we looked at critical thinking, we knew we had to have at least one accountant on the panel. So we got a chartered accountant, and Rex has held many senior positions in the industry over the last 35 years. In recent times, he's worked in leadership roles within the financial services and telco business sectors. And Rex, what I really enjoy is your passion that you've got for leadership and helping both in mentoring and helping future leaders to reach their full potential. And I know you're very involved in a business ministry in terms of mentoring as well. So thanks for joining us, Rex.
Thanks, Ash.
Yeah, and Gavin Rich. Gav is the Group Commodities and Treasury Exec at RCL Foods. We oversee commodity hedging, derivative risk management and group treasury. In addition, Gavin also serves as the chairman of the board of a financing business providing agricultural funding to sugarcane growers. Quite intimidating, that CV as well there, Gav. So thanks also for joining us. A lot of those words I don't quite understand, but it sounds way above my pay level. And that's why we've got you two guys here on the panel today, but thank you.
Thank you.
So for our viewers, as discussed, we're going to be talking about critical thinking. In the lead up to this discussion, I did a little bit of research, and what was quite interesting was that some of the articles that I read mentioned that although critical thinking is considered a soft skill, it's right now is considered actually one of the most sought after skills for people looking for employees in their businesses. So what I thought I'd do is just break it down in terms of a definition of critical thinking, and then we're going to dig into the nuts and bolts of it. So I was looking at definitions and looking at the Oxford Dictionary that I found critical thinking as the objective analysis and evaluation of an issue in order to form a judgment. I found that really interesting because right now, if we look at the challenges that businesses are facing, we're having to make decisions and we're having to really be very clear on our thought processes and in essence use critical thinking. And that's why I think it's quite important that we understand what critical thinking is. So the objective analysis and evaluation of an issue in order to form a judgment. Rex, I'm going to start with you. I'm going to direct the first question to you. So in the context of us speaking into business and critical thinking, can you perhaps speak into what it means to be objective, what it means to analyze, and then finally what it means to evaluate?
Sure. I think that's actually a great question, because before one really dives into the key sort of attributes of critical thinking, as you alluded to me, the essence of a successful businessman is actually to be competitive and to be at least as good as your immediate competitor, but hopefully to be better than the competition. And to be better than competition, it's particularly in a sort of dynamic, changing world today. Without an understanding as to what's sort of driving your business, what are the critical aspects that influence the success of your business, you're never really going to be making sort of, let's call it, good and well thought through decisions. So if you look at, in essence, critical thinking, which really in my head has sort of four major components. You know, the first component being the understanding and the gathering of data to resolve your challenge or your opportunity. The second one being looking at how the data actually references the solution you're looking for, establishing what you think the answer is, and then the effective communication of that. If you put all that together, every single business decision that most people need to make today would invariably involve critical thinking. So a lot has changed in the world today. People often have different new sort of MBA type sort of lingo, but critical thinking has always been around. And it's a very important part of how particularly entrepreneurs actually remain successful in business today.
Okay, excellent. And Gavin, you work in large corporate, and just to preempt this as well, the reason I was quite excited about having both of you on the call is that although, Rex, I know you're from a large corporate background, you're also involved with entrepreneurs, where Gav, you're more in the large corporate space. So looking at it from a large corporate space, do you think critical thinking is just a skill that upper management should have, or is it something that you encourage within your organization at different levels?
So the short answer to that is no. It's not exclusively for upper management. So I think whether you are a business owner or you are in corporate, one of the things which you're always looking at doing is looking at people in your organization who can take on additional responsibility. And generally, those are the people who can look at a problem, who can analyze it, who can propose a solution, who can come up with a way to actually solve the problem that is there. And, the reality is that those skills are generally honed at junior levels. Whatever role you are doing in a corporate, in a small business, to be able to think critically around the problems that you're facing, to demonstrate you can think about how to handle issues, is something which starts on a small scale. There's a biblical principle which says, he who is faithful with little is made ruler over much. And the reality is you have to hone those skills, sort of early in your career or whatever level that you're doing, so that you can demonstrate later on you're able to take some of those bigger decisions. So it's definitely not purely for upper management. In actual fact, the people who in a corporate are going to get promoted ultimately into those senior management roles are those who demonstrate that they can take on sort of the critical thinking side of things.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point there, Gav. I mean, in business, I think it's also not just one decision you're making every 6 months or year. You're basically making important decisions on a daily basis, right? And lots of
Correct.
So, as you're speaking, I was just thinking, I'm more in the small business space, and one of the major changes I made in my businesses was I moved from micromanaging to empowering my staff, and it's something I'm still working on. But I know as someone at a directorial level like yourself, you don't have time to know every small nuance of each position within your business, especially when you're in a large company. So a massive transition for me was really chatting to my staff, and number one, communicating what was important to me. So not 100 important things, going, what are the 1 or 2 things that are most important to my organization? And then in my weekly and monthly meetings, make it very clear what was important and what needed to be achieved on a weekly and monthly basis, and making it measurable and there being a level of accountability. And I found, instead of me telling my staff what to do if they didn't achieve their KPIs or goals, we created a culture where the expectation was that that person on a weekly basis would give me feedback on whether they've achieved their KPI, but then would also give me a commitment as to how they were going to solve the problem. So we created a culture of a weekly basis of meeting, but them expecting me not to give them answers, me expecting to say, okay, you didn't reach your KPI, what are you going to do about it? And that's been revolutionary for me and all my businesses, because now I've empowered my staff and they're coming up with solutions based on understanding what's important to that business. I just want to say, Gavin, it was quite interesting in the lead up to this interview. You ask a lot of questions, and all the right up to last night before this interview, and I realized, okay, we've got the right person here. He's really thinking this through. No stone was left unturned. So just going to lead into our next question. We alluded to the various stages of critical thinking. Rex talked about that. And in the business context, critical thinking goes hand in hand with problem solving and ultimately making decisions. Often the evaluation stage doesn't always provide one clear-cut path or solution. How do you then go about making a decision? Gav?
Sorry, it's me. Yes. Yeah. Look, that's a complex one. So the reality is, everybody is going to face different challenges, and there isn't kind of this clear-cut cookie model on how to approach things. Or people will develop their own style of sort of critical thinking and evaluating problems. But I think, the reality is there's certain basics. You have to do the basics correctly. So when you're faced with a problem, you have to go and do your research. You have to do the hard work around what is the problem, what are the things that I need to consider, what are the challenges that we're going to face, what are the consequences of my decisions. The reality is decisions are ultimately a probabilities game. You're never going to have, well, very seldom are you going to have certainty that a decision that you take is correct. And what you have to do is stack the odds in your favor. So do the preparation, give yourself every chance of getting to the point of making sure that the decision that you make is correct. So first of all, do the hard yards. The next thing I would say is once you've done the work behind it and you're close to sort of making a decision, I'm sure a lot of people here are believers. The other thing which I would really recommend doing, particularly when you're facing major decisions, is actually pray on it. And when I say pray, what I mean by that is get yourself a journal and write down the prayer, write down what it is you're asking God for in terms of the challenge that you're facing and the decision that you're trying to make. And I think the reality is you'll get words, you'll get scriptures, you'll get people saying things to you, and write those things down to give you a sense of direction of, are you going on the right path? Are you proceeding to the right point? And the other thing that comes with that is I also think the Holy Spirit does talk to us and gives us a sense of, are we making the right decision? Now, it's quite interesting. When I was driving down here this morning, I was listening to the Killers of all bands, as you do, and they've actually got a song out at the moment called "My Own Soul's Warning." And it's interesting, the lyrics. The lyrics say, you know, I was reflecting on my own soul's warning, and I'm going to get the lyrics quite wrong here, but basically says, I was listening to my own soul's warning, but at the end, it just didn't feel right. And I think sometimes what happens is you can do all the work behind what you think the right decision is, but something just doesn't sit well. And I think there's a place for trusting your gut instinct around what the right decision is. And sometimes, you know, the facts will tell you not to take a particular course of action, but there's a gut instinct inside which says, no, this is the right thing to do. And I think there's an element of faith that I would recommend building into the decisions that we take. But all of that also comes down to one thing: you have to have the confidence to actually make the decision. You can do all the hard work, all the preparation behind that, but if you're not willing to make that final decision, then it becomes pointless. And I think too often we are scared of failure, scared of criticism, scared of making the wrong call. And so often we'll sort of sit back and not make the decision. And sometimes no decision is the worst thing you can do. So, you know, how does someone get to that point of being confident enough to make a decision? I think most people have to learn that on their own. But the biggest thing is to develop that confidence of saying, I'm going to take this decision. I've done all the hard work. I believe it's the right thing to do. And if it's wrong, you'll learn. You know, sometimes, especially in large organizations, I think people are looking to you to take a decision, at least, even if it's the wrong decision. We might be going the wrong direction, but at least we kind of know exactly where we're going. So I think, you know, getting to that point of being sort of having the courage and the guts to actually make a strong decision is absolutely crucial than stagnating.
That's excellent. And it's really encouraging, you know, as a small business owner, I think you sometimes think that almost the higher up the decisions go in big organizations, that it just becomes board decisions. So it's really encouraging to hear that, you know, people at your kind of level are actually plugging into what God has to say about it. I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here, because the reality of decision making is that there's always a time pressure. And I suppose what you're talking about is waiting for a peace. How do you deal with that tension between the time pressure and big decisions that affect a lot of people, and then kind of waiting to hear from God?
Yeah, that is a challenging one. But look, I'd benchmark that against the scale of the decision that you're taking. You know, again, sort of smaller decisions, sometimes, you know, where the consequences of them are less. Yeah, you'd love to have sort of feel God's voice directly on everything, but sometimes you just don't. If, however, you're taking major decisions, and when I say major, I mean, are you sort of looking to go into a new business venture? Are you actually looking to shut down part of the business, which is going to cost jobs, where there are major consequences? You know, if you're looking to break into new countries, those are the decisions where I would say, rather take your time. Those are the decisions which you don't rush, and do aim for, you know, have you done everything that you can? And I think there is a challenge in that sometimes we want that complete sense of peace that it's the right decision. We don't necessarily get that. And that's where we just have to step out in faith and kind of go, I've done what I can, I prayed, but now I trust and I step forward. How you get that point will vary depending on the decision.
That's really good. It actually reminds me of a podcast I listened to with Andy Stanley, and the tagline that I've always remembered is, he said, pay attention to the tension. And then I guess that's what it's about. And then the waiting for that peace, being willing to actually wait. Rex, I'm going to throw a question at you now. There's probably two types of business people watching this interview, and there's those that are looking at new opportunities, and then there are those that are probably facing tough and challenging times right now, and who've got problems to solve. Could you maybe walk us through the practical process of using critical thinking, whether you've got that exciting opportunity and you don't know whether it is in fact a good opportunity, because sometimes, you know, good opportunities aren't actually the right opportunities, and then also when having to make tough decisions, if I can use an example, cutting staff right now.
Yeah, sure. If you don't mind, if I can maybe just reflect a little bit on some of the great insight that Gavin's actually provided, and maybe just add a bit more to some of the points, is I think the one thing that's important to the whole critical sort of thinking process is to to create a timeline in terms of how long you think is right to make a decision. And in that process, you know, if it's a simple decision, you could certainly think within days or weeks you could actually make a decision, versus much tougher decisions will actually require, you know, could be months to do it. And the only reason why I mention that is because another aspect that's important to critical thinking is to be clear who the stakeholders are that you need to influence or rely on to make these decisions. And I've always felt in critical thinking, if you're honest with your stakeholder groupings in terms of what you're trying to do, you bring them along for the journey. That in its own right actually does take some pressure off decision making, because you upfront have said, look, this is going to be a fairly tough sort of road to walk, so I need a couple of months to get my head around this. And people say, okay, it makes sense. So how you actually plan the initial process of how to embark on critical thinking, I thought was a very good point that Gavin raised. And the other thing I also wanted to reference was, I remember many days coming home from work and feeling quite flustered, and obviously in a good marriage you always talk to your spouse, and my wife would always say to me, well, have you prayed on the matter? And I think it's always a good reminder that the most important thing about what I always enjoyed about business is that you're actually working with God to be successful, and you're not just working for the sake of working, kind of thing. But back to your question. So look, at the moment, if you look at two types of people, so you may have people that are fortunate looking at a business opportunity, and I guess I'd much rather be in that space at the moment than those maybe at the other end of the spectrum that are looking at a major challenge, which could be sort of cost cutting, could even be retrenching staff. And both of those actually require the same process of critical thinking to be adhered to. But you'll find there'll be very different emotions and empathy that will come through in those decisions. So let's maybe start with the first one, which is the exciting opportunity. To me, the most important thing is, and again, I'm putting my business hat on, is whenever I think of opportunity, I always think of customers. And the most important thing, excuse me, in critical thinking when it comes to opportunities is to put the customer hat on. Be very clear in your own mind that you understand what you're trying to do within the opportunity for the customer, and make sure in that process that you're actually engaging with the customer. That engagement could be, could actually be directly talking to customers. It could be doing research within customer groupings. But the most important thing, as I said, is that you need to engage with your customer. Don't also, in opportunities, have theory that they can't work in practice. And that's why the engagement with the customer is also important. You can actually hopefully demonstrate or show the customer what the opportunity looks like, get hands-on experience from them as to how they enjoyed the experience or how they enjoyed the use of the product in this example of the opportunity. And then use that as a very, very clear sort of feedback into the ultimate decision-making loop. So my point, if you look at the opportunity, is that for it to be successful, it's about engaging with the customer. And in this case, it would be invariably people that are outside of your business. If you look at let's look at the other end of the spectrum, and we reference maybe cost cutting with staff, or even just cutting costs per se. And I think what Gavin said, these are often quite tough decisions, because it requires you to make a decision that not necessarily, it's not what everybody wants to see. In this kind of situation, it's almost the customer becomes internal to your organization in some cases. So if you're looking to cut costs, which invariably, if you look at, cutting staff, it could imply that you've either got to reduce people's salaries, or in the worst case, you may even have to retrench staff. So there, the key process is to make sure that you're first on the right side of the labor law. You've got to make sure that from even a change management perspective, that there's a proper engagement with the affected people. Do they understand the rationale for why you're making these decisions? And as we've referenced in a few points through this conversation, if you're dealing with facts and you're communicating those facts effectively to people, they're more likely to understand why that decision needs to be made. I mean, they may not necessarily want to agree with the decision, but there will be a deeper understanding as to why that decision needs to be made. And as Gavin said, particularly in tough decisions, someone has to make that decision, and I guess if you the entrepreneur in the business, it's up to you to make that decision. So that's how I would probably reference the approach to opportunities, which is very much almost external customer related, and almost cost cutting, which is almost the internal workings of the business model. If I can also add, in COVID-19, it's been particularly relevant where if you look at small entrepreneurs that have struggled to pay rent or even struggled to pay salaries and wages. As I said, the best way to deal with these kind of things is actually to be upfront and communicate to the stakeholders exactly the facts of the situation, because then I think there's a better understanding as to why that decision needs to be made.
Yeah, so my take home there from what you just said, Rex, and that was really good, was on the one hand, you need to be very clear on the opportunity and whether there is a real need. And there's a lot of factors as to whether it's a real need. And the second point, what I really found interesting was just the concept of taking into account the facts. And I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges, if you look at critical thinking, not just in the business sense, is establishing what is fact. And I think that takes a lot of homework because we don't always get the correct information.
Yeah. We've had quite a few discussions, but why I always actually lean my leadership enjoyment to the word entrepreneurial is because having worked in a corporate world, you'll find that there's obviously a lot more people that actually make up a corporate business, and a lot of people in more senior positions are sometimes a bit disconnected to what really happens on the ground, at the customer-facing levels.
Yeah.
Where typically the type of small entrepreneur that we're talking about is living and breathing customers and the business every day. So they surprisingly are way more qualified to deal with the facts than in some corporate situations. It's right there at their fingertips. The essence on that is to don't be biased in being selective on what facts to use. So, facts are facts. If used correctly, will definitely make a much better decision. And entrepreneurs, I always believe, are way better positioned to have access to those kinds of facts, particularly in a smaller business.
And I suppose that's one of the challenges as an entrepreneur, especially if you've got a passion for your business, is to actually remove yourself, sit back and objectively look at the facts as opposed to allowing emotion to make decisions. Yes. And I suppose that's one of the arts of critical thinking.
I think it was you or Gavin, I'm not sure, but one of you alluded to the fact that, in fact, it was you, Ashleigh, you spoke about taking more of a step back and almost trusting and getting your staff to take responsibility. And that's another important aspect of critical thinking, is to eliminate a level of bias, is to actually become a good listener. Sort of try and objectively see both sides of the coin, because it can only help for a more balanced decision.
For sure. So, Gav, taking into account what we've just discussed with Rex and what Rex just spoke about, if the product or service that Rex has just spoken about was pitched to you in a corporate, what would it look like that would help to inform your decision making on whether to contract with a said company? I'm kind of flipping on this on you, and looking from both a corporate perspective as well as a small company.
Yeah, Alex, it's a great question. So I think, the first thing is, if you are engaging with a big corporate with your business idea, the first thing you have to be able to do is you have to be able to sell your idea. So obviously the assumption is you've got that initial meeting, you're kind of pitching the idea. You have to believe in the idea yourself. You've got to be able to demonstrate the basics, that you understand the market that you're operating in, you understand the commercial opportunity that is being presented to the corporate, that the corporate is going to benefit from. You know your product, you know exactly what it is that you're dealing with, and you understand the risks and rewards behind it. So you have to have done your homework behind it, and not be fly by night. So I'd like to see that you put a lot of thought and effort into the plan. And obviously it needs to demonstrate your normal profitability, or sort of good commercial aspects as key. The other thing which is quite interesting, and I think sometimes maybe some of the smaller businesses might overlook this piece, is a large corporate is always going to do background checks. So if you've got an idea, if you're pitching your product, you have to be able to demonstrate that you've got the capacity to line it up. And simple things like you'll get onboarded into a corporate. Your business is going to become a supplier. I'm using supplier as an example. Do the basics, like are you able to FICA the entity? Are your tax returns up to date? Can you provide sort of credibility behind the business that you're dealing with? Because no matter how good your idea is, if there's a sense of, well, we don't really know that you can deliver on what you're doing, then the idea is dead in the water. The third thing I would say is, we deal in very competitive spaces. So, I don't like the word disruptive because it just gets used so much, but the reality is, if you're pitching your service or idea to a corporate, chances are there are other people who can do what you do, maybe slightly differently and in a different way, and the commercial offering might be different to yours. But one of the things which we're also going to look for is, can we trust the people that we are dealing with? Do you have integrity? So I think, reputation does go a long way. I'll use Durban as an example. It's a small place. And, if you're out there cutting corners, reputation does precede out there. So don't ever put yourself in that position. Do what you say you're going to. If we're going to have a meeting at 10 a.m., be there at 10 a.m. If you tell me you're going to email the presentation afterwards, email the presentation. Because often that's what's going to differentiate you, is people are going to look at you and go, does this person or business have integrity? Can we trust them? And do we want to partner with them? And sometimes that will be the differentiating factor of being able to actually land the business proposition that you're trying to engage with in a corporate.
It's really good, Gav, because the reason I pitched this question is because I was reading a couple of weeks ago and I heard of I think it's a 10 billion Rand investment that's going to be happening in and around the Durban region. And a lot of it is building development. And I thought to myself, sure, there's a bunch of contractors that are straight away, they should be rubbing their hands together going, there's opportunity for me as a contractor. But they're also thinking, how do I get that contract worked? And the reality is that they're going to have to pitch to people like you. So there's going to, in those big companies, there's going to be critical thinkers like yourself. And you're going to have to pitch. And the reality is you need to almost get into the mind's eye, if I could call it that, of that person who you speak to, who's going to be critical of what they put in front of them. So you almost need to be thinking ahead. What are the expectations that they're going to require? And what should I be bringing to the table?
So, if I could just make a point on that, I think, if you have a small business or a startup and you're trying to get in with a large corporate, don't be shy to leverage your network. So often what will happen is I will receive calls from people who I just simply don't know, but they're trying to supply, our company in a particular area, which I might have nothing to do with me or understanding. But, if they've got something credible, I'll pass them to the right person, and it's up to them to then try and sell what they could do. So I think, use your network where possible, and then obviously you've got to put your idea and make sure that it works.
Exactly. Rex, we're running out of time, so I'm going to throw a last question at you. You've been involved in a lot of mentoring during COVID, which I must really commend you on. Could you perhaps provide one or two practical examples where critical thinking has been useful, and how and when?
Yes. I'm going to pick up actually on a very good point that Gavin raised, which is that entrepreneurial network. Because I think one of the things that we're trying to do through Faith at Work in the business ministry is to expose people like ourselves to the smaller entrepreneur, in a sense where you need advice or need assistance as to how to, let's call it, fine-tune a critical thinking solution in the eyes of a big corporate. It's better to draw on your network experience. So you maybe have people that can tell you, been there, done that. That's how I would approach the opportunity. And interestingly, if there's probably about 3 or 4 sort of COVID-19 type mentorship sort of, let's call them challenges that I've been going through in the last couple of months. And a lot of them have actually been simple questions to say, look, I've got this challenge or this opportunity. In your experience, how would you approach that? And then it's been quite great just to sort of share things that in my world they seem fairly simple, but in their world they're almost seen as more complex. So getting down to the kinds of challenges that I've looked at is that, unfortunately, in the COVID times, most people have actually been facing tougher challenges. They've been looking at, the fact is for 3 months, the majority of people, their revenue dried up. Cash flow was one way out. All you're doing is paying expenses, paying rent, paying salaries, for example. So people were really forced to almost revisit the entire business model and understand how we're going to survive in the next 3 or 4 months. And the common theme that went through all of these critical thinking sort of challenges was basically to start with the facts. be honest with yourself as to what is the real challenge that you're facing. Once you've got the facts, be clear what you can do and what you can't do. What's in your control, what's out of your control. You can't just wave the magic wand and money appears in your bank account. So if it's a cash flow challenge and you now have suppliers you can't pay, or you've got landlords wanting rent and you can't pay them, what I found has worked most effectively is that you become honest with your stakeholders. You very quickly in the process engage with the landlord or engage with your people that work for you and explain to them the situation. We either in business together and we've got to find a way of partnering through the crisis. And what I found is that, and it's just my personal style of leadership, is that if you're honest with your stakeholders and again presenting the facts, people can see that you're not really a fly-by-night person. You genuinely understand what the challenge is and you're presenting it in a way that people believe you can get through it. People are more likely to buy into that. And I think the other good thing about COVID is that you weren't alone. I think maybe other than the government sort of public sector, most of the private sector were certainly affected and most people understood the kind of challenges that we were facing. So that's what I've actually been busy with the last 3 or 4 months, is really just helping people, call it survive or maintain their businesses until we could get to probably from about July, August, things started looking up. But now it's a process of sticking to your guns and managing your plan on the way forward.
I think it's easy to miss some of the nuggets that you're mentioning. I think the one part you mentioned was understanding the challenge and then presenting solutions. Do you want to maybe unpack that for us?
Yeah, so look, if I understand without mentioning names, I mean, I was involved in a very interesting lighting business, and the fact that it was my neighbor and I got a knock on the door and he casually said, do you mind coming down to see me on Monday at the office? And I just got some challenges that I wanted to talk to you about. And, within about half an hour of me just looking at his income statement and balance sheet, it became very clear to me that the crux of his challenge was that regardless of COVID or not, is that his overheads had grown significantly faster than the revenue that he was earning. And the reality was that he needed to cut overheads, and he needed to cut overheads quickly. So, maybe for a trained eye like myself as an accountant, I basically showed him the facts. We then agreed how we're going to have to cut costs, and obviously it cut into people costs. Unfortunately, we had to retrench people, but it was very much just really analyzing, in this particular case, the income statement and cash flow to work out that to survive post-COVID-19 wasn't just about getting your revenue back on stream. It was also about right-sizing the business, and it was probably something that they hadn't done for years.
I'm just trying to get inside your mind, just for our viewers, as to
Sure.
because it probably happens naturally because you've done this a lot of times, but I presume there's a process of you asking a whole lot of whys, and then also evaluating, asking a whole lot of whys, and every time you get an answer, asking a why again, and a why and a why, until you get to the core of the issue, and evaluating whether that is, and testing whether that's actually the true reason why you're in this current situation. Would that be correct?
Correct, yes. I mean, in this particular case, it's a very, very simple equation. The success of business invariably, and I'm oversimplifying, comes down to the money that's in the bank account. And if there's no money in the bank account and the overdraft is going up and up and up, then you've got to start interrogating the question. Why am I paying out more than what I'm getting in? Which is really, I know I'm oversimplifying, but you're 100% right. It's just about the ongoing interrogation and questions. And even in looking at cost control, a lot of people find ways to justify anything. The kind of car you want to drive, it's also about saying, but why do you need to spend X per month on a car? You could spend Y. Why do you need this? Why do you need 4 delivery vehicles? You could maybe survive with 2 delivery vehicles. So it's almost that ongoing interrogation of the cost within the business.
Gav, if I can I'm going to come back to you, Rex, but Gav, you sit on a board where you look at whether to invest in the agricultural sector. I presume you undergo the same process where people present their business plans and you literally are asking all the whys. Is that correct?
Yeah. So that's a very interesting space. So we're often getting approached for funding, and we have to interrogate what is being presented to us quite thoroughly. You've got to look at the income statement, balance sheet, but it often goes beyond that. You've actually got to look at what's happening behind that. You've got to be able to see through the numbers and really kind of stress test the business case and the viability behind it. Naturally, when people are applying for funding, they're always going to put their best foot forward. Every level of funding is associated, there's a level of risk associated with that. So it does take some really kind of deep analysis and questioning and trying to think around the situation and the risks and the pitfalls that might be there to hold up or prevent that, that plan from being a success. But there's another side to it as well, and that, I think often large corporates are typically wanting businesses to succeed, and there's this constant balance between risk and then actually kind of going, well, we understand your case, there's a level of risk, and we're actually willing to take that risk. Interestingly, I heard that I believe Elon Musk, before he started SpaceX, gave himself a less than 10% chance of success, less than 10%. Still went for it. So obviously he was really able to sell that idea. I mean, the risk behind that is just absolutely massive, given that he's not a qualified aeronautical engineer, or space engineer. But so to be able to present a solid case to tell people these are the risks behind it, and to work with stakeholders, as Rex was talking, will result in partnership. And corporates actually do want businesses to succeed. It's not just about saying no. Corporates do want businesses to succeed.
In order to do that, if I'm presenting to you, Gav, I've got to pretty much be thinking exactly the kind of questions you're going to be asking to provide a bulletproof case that is actually in both of our interests, because that's the way we should be thinking.
And so we're typically going to ask you, what if this happens? What, have you thought about this? We're going to really sort of stress test what it is that you're presenting. So it bodes well if you can demonstrate you've thought about the risks and the challenges that could be encountered along the way. And if you can show that you've really thought about it, you're never going to cover every base. But if you can show you've really thought about the major ones, and people have a good understanding of that, okay, we understand the risks going in, we're going in with our eyes wide open, but we believe that, as I said earlier, decisions are down to probability. We believe that the probabilities are stacked in our favor, that this will end in a success. Then you've got a much better chance of proceeding with your business plan.
That's excellent. I don't know if there's anything you want to add in closing there, Rex?
No, I was going to say, just to wrap up what Gavin was saying, is that perhaps more relevant to the corporate world, but it's also something that entrepreneurs can take heed of, is that often getting into an opportunity and the risk that you're taking to get to the opportunity, you can also look at the opposite of that, is if things go wrong, how do I get out and minimize my risk? So if you're able to answer both questions, you almost have a better understanding of the risk, because sometimes getting out of a bad decision is way worse than making the decision in the first place, because you never thought it through.
I think that's a great way to end the conversation. Rex, Gav, thanks so much for your time today. I think you've given us a lot to think about, and I really think this is something every business owner should be putting a lot of attention to, not just themselves, but in terms of empowering their team. So thanks again for your time. It's been great chatting. And yeah, it tees us up actually really nicely for our next talk, which is on adaptability or flexibility. One of the discussions in that with Dennis van der Zee is going to actually be about restructuring companies and how you go about the process of restructuring with the way the world is changing. So I think we've actually almost teed up Dennis quite nicely there. But thanks again, guys. It's been really great having you.
Thank you. Thanks, Ed.
Thank you. Cheers.